Alexander Blackwood was accustomed to precision in his life. As CEO of Blackwood Technologies, he demanded order, efficiency, and above all, control. His sprawling penthouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side reflected this philosophy. Immaculate, meticulously organized, a sanctuary of luxury where every object had its place. Tonight, however, something was off. Returning from a business trip at 2 a.m., Alexander expected silence. Instead, as he set his briefcase down in the foyer, a faint glow caught his attention, light spilling from beneath the door of his home office. His security system showed no breaches, which meant whoever was inside belonged there. Alexander moved, quietly down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. As he approached the office, he heard it, the soft tap of fingers on a keyboard, followed by the scratch of pen on paper. Someone was working in his office. At 2 a.m, he pushed the door open, sitting at his desk, hunched over a notebook. With his laptop open beside her was Elena Morales, his housekeeper. She wore simple cotton pajamas instead of her usual uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. Books and papers were spread across his usually pristine desk. For a moment, Alexander simply stared, processing the scene. Elena wasn't cleaning. She wasn't organizing. She was studying? Elena hadn't noticed him yet, her focus absolute as she typed something, then scribbled notes. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he caught sight of the screen. Complex equations, diagrams, what looked like engineering schematics. What exactly are you doing? His voice, though controlled, sliced through the silence. Elena jumped, her pen clattering to the desk as her head snapped up. When she saw Alexander standing in the doorway, her eyes widened with alarm. "Mr. Blackwood, I didn't—" She scrambled to gather her papers, hastily closing windows on the laptop. Her hands trembled as she tried to restore order to the chaos she'd created on his desk. Alexander stepped closer, his sharp gaze focusing on one of the papers she was trying to hide. "Is that a structural engineering problem set?" Elena froze, her fingers still clutching the edge of the paper. She swallowed hard, her shoulders tensing as if bracing for impact. "Yes, sir." Alexander's brow furrowed as he looked from the advanced engineering problems to the woman he'd hired to clean his home. He'd always thought of Elena as efficient, hard-working, and virtually invisible, just another service provider in his carefully constructed life. Now she suddenly looked different, complicated. "You're studying engineering at 2 a.m. in my office." Each question came out more incredulous than the last. Elena's chin lifted slightly, a flash of something defiant in her eyes before. Her gaze dropped again. "I'm sorry for using your space, Mr. Blackwood. The lighting is better here than in my room, and I didn't think you'd be back until tomorrow. That's not what I asked." Alexander moved closer, picking up one of the textbooks on his desk. "Advanced structural analysis?" He flipped through the pages, noting the complex calculations and diagrams. "This is graduate-level work." Elena said nothing, her hands now folded tightly in her lap, but there was something in her posture, a quiet dignity, a refusal to appear ashamed, that caught Alexander's attention. "Answer me, Elena. Why are you studying engineering textbooks? In the middle of the night?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. Then Elena took a deep breath and met his gaze directly. "Because I'm trying to finish my degree." Alexander leaned against his desk, arms folded across his chest. "Your degree," he repeated flatly, "in engineering." Elena nodded once, a single, firm movement. "Yes, sir, civil engineering." Alexander studied her face, looking for signs of deception, finding none. Instead, he saw determination in the set of her jaw, intelligence in her steady gaze. For the first time since hiring her 2 years ago, he really looked at Elena Morales. "And you've been using my office for this... how long?" "Only when you're away," she said quietly. "I always make sure everything is back in its place before you return. I've never touched any of your work or files." Alexander's gaze traveled over the desk, taking in the organized chaos of her study materials. Engineering wasn't a casual hobby. This level of material suggested serious commitment, years of prior education. "Where did you study before?" he asked. Elena hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Universidad Nacional de Ingeniería in Lima." I was in my final year when I had to leave Peru. Alexander raised an eyebrow. That's a prestigious school. Yes, Elena said simply. And yet, Alexander gestured around his penthouse. You're here, cleaning my home instead of designing buildings. A flash of something, pain, frustration, crossed Elena's face before her expression smoothed again. Life doesn't always go as planned, Mr. Blackwood. The quiet dignity in her voice gave Alexander pause. He was used to making quick judgments, sizing people up in an instant. It was part of what made him successful in business, but now he found himself re-evaluating the woman standing before him, realizing how little he actually knew about the person who had been maintaining his home for years. Clearly, he said finally. Pack up your things, we'll discuss this tomorrow. Elena nodded, quickly gathering her materials. Alexander watched her methodical movements, the careful way she organized her books and papers. Even in this, she was precise, efficient. It struck him that these were qualities he valued highly in his executives, qualities he paid top dollar for. As Elena slipped past him toward the door, textbooks clutched to her chest, Alexander found himself asking, "Why civil engineering?" Elena paused, turning back. For a moment she seemed to debate whether to answer, then said simply, "Because I want to build things that last, Mr. Blackwood, things that make life better for people who need it most." With that, she was gone, leaving Alexander alone in his office, suddenly aware of how quiet his perfectly ordered penthouse felt. The next morning, Alexander sat at his kitchen island, coffee untouched beside him as he scrolled through his tablet. But instead of reviewing quarterly projections or acquisition reports, he was looking at something entirely different. Elena Morales' background check from when he'd hired her. The document contained the basics: clean record, proper documentation, previous employers, but revealed nothing about her education or life in Peru. It was as if Elena the engineer had never existed, replaced entirely by Elena the housekeeper. "Your coffee is getting cold." Alexander looked up to find Elena standing in the kitchen doorway. She wore her usual uniform, simple black pants and a grey button-up shirt, but now he noticed how she carried herself, with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with her role in his home. "Sit down, Elena." He gestured to the stool across from him. Elena hesitated, then complied, her posture perfect as she perched on the edge of the seat, hands folded in her lap. "I believe you owe me an explanation," Alexander said, setting his tablet aside. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do." His voice was calm but firm. "You're clearly educated, trained in a prestigious field, yet you're working as my housekeeper. Why?" Elena's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly in her lap. "It's complicated, Mr. Blackwood. I run a multi-billion-dollar technology company, Elena. I can handle complicated." A flash of something, annoyance, amusement, crossed her face before she nodded. "Very well." She took a deep breath. 6 years ago, I was studying civil engineering at UNI in Lima. I was on track to graduate with honors, had an internship lined up with one of Peru's top engineering firms. Alexander listened, intrigued despite himself. This wasn't the conversation he'd expected to have with his housekeeper on a Tuesday morning. "Then my father was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer," Elena continued, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of old pain. "My mother had died years before. My younger sisters were still in school. There was no one else." Alexander's expression remained impassive, but something in his chest tightened. He could guess where this was going. "The medical bills..." Elena shook her head slightly. "They were impossible. Peru's healthcare system. We needed specialized treatments, medications that weren't covered. I tried to balance everything. School, a job, caring for my father, raising my sisters, but it wasn't enough." "So you left university," Alexander stated. Elena nodded. "I took a job with a family in Lima, working as a nanny. The pay was better than anything else I could find without a degree, but even that wasn't enough. And that's when you came to America," Alexander concluded. "Yes. A friend told me about opportunities here, families who would pay well for live-in help. I could send most of my salary home." Eleanor's eyes met his, clear and direct. It was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to pay for my father's treatment, to get my sisters through school. Then I would go back, finish my degree. But, Alexander prompted, hearing the unspoken continuation, but life is rarely that simple, Mr. Blackwood. My father's treatment took longer than expected. My youngest sister needed braces, then college, tuition. The temporary solution became less temporary. Alexander studied her face, seeing the weight of responsibility etched in subtle lines around her eyes that he'd never noticed before. And now? Your father? He's in remission, she said, a small smile softening her features. My sisters are both in university now. Lucia is studying medicine. Maria wants to be a teacher. So why are you still here? Why not go back, finish your degree in Peru? Elena's smile faded. It's been 6 years, Mr. Blackwood. In engineering, that's a lifetime. The technology, the standards, the methods, everything has changed. And frankly, starting over there would mean no income for at least a year. My family still needs my support. So you study in secret, in the middle of the night, using my office, Alexander stated. Not a question, but not quite an accusation either. I'm trying to keep up, to learn the new developments in the field. Elena's voice took on a new intensity. I take online courses when I can afford them. I study during my off hours. I need to be ready when I can finally go back. Alexander leaned back, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the woman sitting across from him. For 2 years, Eleanor had maintained his home with quiet efficiency. He'd barely noticed her presence, had never bothered to learn anything about her beyond what was necessary for employment. And all that time, she'd been carrying this, dreams deferred, ambitions put on hold, a life suspended between what was and what could be. Why didn't you say anything? He asked finally. When I hired you, you never mentioned your background in engineering. Elena gave him a look that managed to be both respectful and slightly incredulous. Mr. Blackwood, you weren't looking to hire an engineer. You were looking for someone to clean your home. Would you have hired me if I'd told you I was 1 semester away from an engineering degree? Alexander frowned. I might have found you something more appropriate at Blackwood. Technologies, perhaps, Helena conceded. Or you might have decided I was overqualified and would leave as soon as something better came along. I couldn't take that risk. My family depends on this income. The truth of her words struck Alexander with uncomfortable force. He prided himself on being a good judge of character, on seeing people's potential, but he'd completely missed Elena's. He'd seen only what he expected to see, just another service worker, invisible in the machinery of his comfortable life. Alexander stood abruptly, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the Manhattan skyline. His company had designed components for several of the buildings visible from this very spot, buildings that would have been impossible without engineers like Eleanor, or rather, the engineer Eleanor should have been. He turned back to her. I'd like to see your work. Eleanor blinked, clearly caught off guard. My work? The engineering problems you were solving last night. Show me. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor nodded and left the room, returning minutes later with her textbooks and notebook. She set them on the kitchen island, opening to the pages she'd been working on. Alexander examined the complex structural calculations, the neatly drawn diagrams, the thoughtful notes in the margins. It was impressive work, precise, methodical, showing both technical proficiency and creative problem-solving. This is good, he said finally, looking up at her. Very good, actually. Thank you, Elena replied, a hint of pride breaking through her typically reserved demeanor. Alexander closed the notebook, his mind already racing ahead. Elena, I'd like to make you a proposition. She stiffened slightly, wariness crossing her features. What kind of proposition? Blackwood Technologies has an engineering division. We develop components for everything from skyscrapers to bridges to sustainable housing projects. We also have a tuition reimbursement program for employees who wish to further their education. Eleanor's expression remained carefully neutral, but Alexander caught the flash of interest in her eyes. I'd like to offer you a position as an engineering assistant, he continued. Part-time to start, allowing you to complete your degree. We'll cover your tuition and provide a schedule that accommodates your classes. Eleanor stared at him, clearly struggling to process his words. Mr. Blackwood, I don't understand. Why would you do this? Alexander considered his answer carefully. He could frame it as charity, as a magnanimous gesture from employer to employee. But something told him Elena Morales would reject such framing outright. Because it's good business, he said instead. The truth simpler and more powerful. You're clearly talented, dedicated, and you solve problems creatively. Those qualities are hard to find. I'd be a poor CEO if I let that potential go to waste simply because you're currently folding my laundry. Something flashed in Elena's eyes, a complex mix of hope, suspicion, and pride. And what about your household? Who would maintain it? I'll hire someone else, Alexander said dismissively. That's easily solved. Elena fell silent, her gaze dropping to her notebook, fingers tracing the edge of the cover. Alexander could almost see the calculations running behind her eyes, not engineering problems now, but the complex equations of pride versus opportunity, of risks versus rewards. There's no obligation to accept, Alexander added. If you prefer to maintain your current position while you save up to return to Peru, that's your choice. But I think you'd be wasting an opportunity and wasting your potential. Elena looked up at him, her expression resolute. May I think about it? Of course, Alexander replied, surprised by her hesitation. He'd expected immediate gratitude, immediate acceptance. Take the day. We can discuss it further tomorrow. Eleanor nodded, gathering her materials. As she turned to leave, Alexander found himself asking, why civil engineering of all the fields you could have chosen? She paused, considering the question. In Lima, where I grew up, there was a community built on a hillside. Makeshift homes, constructed without proper foundations, without proper supports. When the rainy season came, the ground would turn to mud, and houses would collapse. People lost everything, some lost their lives. Her voice softened with memory. An engineer came and designed a retaining wall, a drainage system. Simple solutions. Really, but they saved lives. I wanted to be that person, the one who builds things that matter, things that save lives. The simplicity and sincerity of her answer caught Alexander off guard. In his world of corporate acquisitions and profit, margins such straightforward idealism was rare. Thank you for your honesty, he said finally. Elena met his gaze directly. And thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Blackwood, regardless of what I decide. After she left, Alexander remained at the window, watching the city sprawl below him. He'd built his career, his fortune, on identifying opportunities others missed. Yet he'd missed the potential right under his own roof for 2 years. It was a humbling realization. The following evening, Alexander returned home to find Elena waiting for him in the living room. She stood as he entered, her posture straight, her expression determined. Have you made your decision? He asked, setting his briefcase down. I have, Elena replied. I'd like to accept your offer, but I have conditions. Alexander raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Few people dared to negotiate with him. I'm listening. First, I want to earn this position. I'll take any qualifying tests, assessments, or interviews your HR department requires. I don't want special treatment. Alexander nodded, respecting her pride. Fair enough. Second, I'd like to continue working here part-time, at least until you find a suitable replacement. I won't leave you without household help. That's not necessary. It is to me, Elena interrupted, then immediately looked abashed at her boldness. I'm sorry, but it matters that I fulfill my commitments. Alexander studied her, seeing again that quiet dignity that had first caught his attention. Very well. What else? Elena took a deep breath. Last, and most important, if I take this position, I need to be clear that I plan to eventually return to Peru. Once I complete my degree and gain experience, I want to use my skills in communities that need them most. That's always been my goal. Of all her conditions, this surprised Alexander the most. Most people who entered his corporate world were hungry for advancement, for the prestige and wealth that came with climbing the Blackwood Technologies ladder. You don't want a career at Blackwood? He asked. I want experience, knowledge and skills I can take back home, Elena said firmly. There are communities in Peru that need engineers far more than Manhattan does, Mr. Blackwood. Alexander considered her words, finding himself oddly moved by her conviction. I understand, he said finally, and I accept your conditions. When would you like to start? Relief washed over Elena's face, followed by a smile that transformed her features. Bright, genuine, filled with a hope so tangible it seemed to light her from within. As soon as possible, Alexander extended his hand. Then welcome to Blackwood Technologies, Ms. Morales. As they shook hands, Alexander was struck by how this small moment seemed to matter more than many of the multi-million-dollar deals he'd closed over the years. Here was something authentic, not charity, not obligation, but the simple recognition of human potential, the removal of artificial barriers that should never have existed in the first place. 3 years later, Alexander stood at the back of a university auditorium, watching as Elena Morales crossed the stage to receive her engineering degree summa cum laude. She'd completed her coursework in record time, balancing classes with her work at Blackwood Technologies, where she'd quickly advanced from assistant to junior engineer. He wasn't supposed to be here, had a board meeting in Chicago that afternoon, but something had compelled him to witness this moment. Perhaps it was curiosity about how her story would end, or perhaps it was something deeper, a need to see the culmination of potential finally fulfilled. As Elena accepted her diploma, looking out at the crowd, her gaze found his. Surprise registered on her face, followed by a smile of recognition and gratitude. Alexander nodded in acknowledgement, his own smile small but genuine. After the ceremony, they met briefly outside the auditorium. Mr. Blackwood, I didn't expect you to come, Elena said, still in her cap and gown, diploma clutched in her hand. Neither did I, Alexander admitted, but I wanted to congratulate you in person. Your work at Blackwood has been exemplary. Thank you, Elena replied, for everything. Not just for coming today, but for... She gestured vaguely, encompassing the degree, the job, the opportunity. You did the work, Alexander said simply. I just removed an obstacle. Elena smiled at that. Sometimes that's all people need. A comfortable silence fell between them, both aware that this moment marked not just an ending, but a beginning. Elena would be leaving soon, returning to Peru with her degree and 3 years of experience at one of America's top engineering firms. She'd already been in contact with organizations working on infrastructure projects in Lima's underserved communities. When do you leave? Alexander asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd approved her resignation letter himself. Next month, Elena replied. I've been offered a position with a non-profit that builds sustainable housing and infrastructure in Lima. They're lucky to have you, Alexander said, meaning it. Elena studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. You know, when you found me studying that night, I was terrified. I thought you'd fire me on the spot. Instead, I hired you twice, Alexander said wryly. Elena laughed, the sound bright in the afternoon air. Life has strange turns. 3 years. Ergo, I was cleaning your home. Today, she held up her diploma. Today, you're exactly who you were always meant to be, Alexander finished for her. An engineer who builds things that last. Elena's smile softened. Things that make life better for people who need it most, she added, echoing the words she'd spoken to him that first night. As they parted ways, Alexander watched Elena join. Her family, her father now in remission, and her sisters both home from university for their sister's graduation. They embraced her with pride and love, taking photos, celebrating not just her achievement but her journey. Alexander turned away, heading toward his waiting car, his thoughts already shifting to the board meeting ahead. But something had changed in him since that night 3 years ago. He found himself looking more closely at the people around him, the barista at his coffee shop working on a novel, the security guard studying for law school, the janitor at Blackwood Technologies who spoke 5 languages. He'd learned from Elena, Morales, that potential existed everywhere, often hidden behind the labels and roles society assigned. Sometimes, all it took to unleash that potential was one person willing to look past those labels, to see not just what was, but what could. And in a world built on systems that too often limited rather than liberated, that might be the most powerful act of all. What about you? Have you ever discovered unexpected potential in someone society overlooked? Or perhaps you've had your own talents dismissed because of who you are or where you come from? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring stories about breaking barriers and finding your true path here on Unseen Brilliance.